There's a great New York City policy now that 10% of the energy budget, the amount of money that the city spends on energy, goes to energy efficiency projects to retrofit buildings and just make city operations more efficient for the long term. And I was looking at the Department of Sanitation annual budget, and for fiscal year 13, there's projections, line item 106 is for motor vehicle fuel, and it's over $30 million, well over $30 million, just for the New York City Department of Sanitation to put gas in the garbage trucks. That doesn't take into account anything else. And so by that dollar amount and thinking about this 10% energy efficiency, I was wondering if anybody in the city had thought about putting 10% of that motor vehicle fuel budget instead into building up local composting infrastructure, or maybe even 5%. Because if I had 10%, then I would have over $3 million year one for composting projects locally. And you know, there's this stigma against compost. I could spend $1 million of that in year one hiring Rubenstein PR to do a really nice propaganda campaign to prove to people that composting wasn't dangerous and would probably actually reduce the amount of rats in the city. And then onward, you know, I mean, there's 1,600 public schools. There could be a lot of integration of public school students and local Department of Sanitation workers working at schools with kids, compost right into school gardens. There's a lot of landscape architects who are probably importing lots and lots of soil. So I just wondered if that, since New York City's left the room, I wondered if anybody has seen that going on in other cities.
You talk in your book about the relationship between cities and waste, and historically the notion of why waste systems were set up the way they were. And I think you bring up an excellent point in your question. I think traditionally we've had a very negative attitude towards waste, and that's what's precipitated all of the infrastructural decisions we made. But to unravel them is significant, and I don't know if any of you have seen other places in the country or around the world where they've begun to really solve those waste problems, because I think there's a very direct connection between food and waste that I think the city could take great advantage of. So I don't know if any of your experiences to that effect.
Well, I was just going to say, I thought Tim's point earlier on about the fact that, you know, cities like San Francisco that, you know, lack the space to get rid of their waste, that start to then face, you know, what waste is, and then go through this kind of this transformation of realising it's actually quite useful stuff. And you know, I remember reading, you know, sort of when I was doing research for my book, that, you know, Vienna was achieving massive levels of, I mean, I think similar to what San Francisco is now achieving in terms of recycling waste, and they built a kind of an artwork style, you know, anaerobic, you know, digester in the middle of the city with kind of, you know, bells and whistles on it, more or less to say, you know, look, this is happening, and it's the middle, get used to it and learn to love your waste. And this is apparently a tourist attraction, this place, you know. Same with Charlie the Chocolate Factory, you go and kind of watch, you know, banana skins getting turned into, you know, and it's I think it's very, by the way, I wanted to say earlier on, I mean, I do think this is absolutely fascinating. When Paris and, I mean, waste historically was always considered an absolutely golden, vital, wonderfully, you know, the valuable thing that it is. And then when cities grew to a certain size, it was only when they couldn't use their own waste that the negative attitudes towards waste began. And of course, you know, in Britain, in London, you know, the great stink of 1850 something or other was basically when the River Thames went solid because there was so much stuff. Sorry. I apologise. I know it's late in the evening. We're all feeling a bit sort of, you know, delicate after all the listening all day. But you know, and that was when they decided to do something about it. And they got Joseph Bazalgette in, you know, and he basically came up with the idea of redirecting all of the London's, you know, the Thames' tributaries, just basically canalising them and doing, you know, egg-shaped tunnels. And it's a brilliant system. But there was a huge from places like Germany. Justus Liebig, who's the father of fertilizer, so-called, because he was the first person to start to, to realise that actually, you could boost the nutrition of the plant by chucking, NPK at it. He wrote to the British Parliament begging them not to build a sewage system because he said, you are throwing away all the nutrition that you're going to need on the land and you're flushing it into the sea. And this is just a terrible, terrible mistake. And the same thing happened when the Parises were built. Victor Hugo wrote a long diatribe basically saying, this stuff is gold and we can't afford to flush it away. So I think it's fascinating that people realise the innate value of sewage. And of course now we know we're going to hit peak phosphorus in about 30 years or something. Phosphorus being part of the golden triad NPK. And actually human sewage is going to be the most easily accessible source of it. So again, it's another issue of the kind of the need. We can't keep chucking any of this stuff away.
It's interesting to hear Adam say that one of the main barriers to dealing with that waste is that the city doesn't control the waste pickup, but yet the city regulates waste pickup. And if you look at Action,
5% is still 30%.
If you look at Action Carbon or any of the major private waste pickup companies in the city, all of them are starting to get into the composting business. And so the question is the city giving them incentives to move in that direction faster? And I go back to the example of City Harvest, which has built this infrastructure for rescuing, I think, millions, it's maybe hundreds of thousands of tons of food a year that would have been landfilled otherwise. And couldn't you imagine a similar infrastructure that would use fleets of trucks and transfer stations to rescue waste, even a fraction of our food waste, organic food waste, in the same exact way? Now, City Harvest is supported partly by donations. Would people donate to a company that's devoted to, rescuing organic waste in New York, perhaps? And maybe it's in the best interest of the city and all these private partners to get behind it as well. So, I agree with you that there's, no excuse good enough to stop, to not pick up all that waste.
I would just wonder, you mentioned food culture, we need to sort of think about that or change it. So Tom, do we need a different view of waste? Do we need to cultivate a new attitude about waste? We have this sort of engineering, flush and forget, get it away.
There's a real good example. I live on Staten Island, so we were the repository for the city's waste for, 75 years or so. The city put forth an initiative to do a waste-to-energy facility, in my personal opinion, a very intelligent, high-tech attempt to begin to start thinking about, using opportunities to create energy out of waste. And it was resoundingly defeated by the masses in Staten Island because they're like, you're putting waste back in Staten Island. And it's just this kind of visceral, response because it's just their attitude about, which is, in some ways legitimate because it was a place where there was a landfill for so many years. But the messaging there was what was the problem because people didn't even understand what it was that they were trying to do. And, I'm not placing blame or anything, but I think the messaging is really important here. I think people, need to have a better understanding of compost. They need to have a better understanding of waste. And I think there's a lot of efforts going on in the city to begin to do that, but I don't think it's widespread yet by any means. So. We have one more question in the front.